So once the leaves are off the trees, the sun sets back, and it totally changes the backyard in the wintertime. But not necessarily for one one. Not How are you? I'm good.
Hey. I'll get some more.
Sure.
All three phones.
Randy, are you ready? Hello, sir. How are you?
I can leave the phone in the car.
For a commercial break.
All right. Good morning, everyone. I am thrilled to call to order our 9 a.m. Board of Supervisors for our November 29th joint work session.
And I'm happy to call to order the school board for participation in this joint work session.
Fantastic. Thank you, everybody, for coming. Looks to be a great crowd. Must be something exciting going on. So since it's exciting, I'll turn it over to someone who's a lot more excited than me. Dr. Rayleigh, take it away.
All right, well, good morning and welcome everybody. Today is certainly a very important pit stop on this journey that's been going on for quite some time, as we know, and in some ways dating back to maybe all of our service in this county, when even discussions were taking place in Goochland County around 2007, 2008 about a new Goochland Elementary School. So this has been certainly an important conversation in our community for quite some time. A few introductions really quickly. In addition to the internal staff that we have here representing the school division, we have a few folks who've been a part of this project along the way. Last summer we hired Stantec as our architect on this project, and Dr. Bill Bradley, who's the principal architect for Stantec, has been working with us along the way, is here to answer any technical questions that I may need assistance with. In the back of the room we also have Mr. Jim Yatzik and Mr. Ryan Waldrop, who represent the firm of MVP, who the school division hired last summer, again, to represent our interest in this, making sure that we have a quality project for our community. So, looking forward to our conversation today. I have some natural breaking points in the conversation for questions, clarification, anything that the group may need. But before that, if you have any questions, if I'm going through a slide and something resonates with you, we can pause at any moment. This is a discussion, right? This is a really important discussion for our community. I really want to make sure that everybody who is making decisions on this project fully understands everything so that you can make an informed decision moving forward. So, order of events for today, I do want to go back in history just a little bit, just the standard set for the benefit of the audience who may not have been a part of the conversation in the past. Spend some time unpacking the project budget, really break that apart a little bit, and talk about where we have been and where we are now with some factual information. Present to you for your consideration and discussion a balanced financial model, given some parameters and some potential revenue streams, and then just have some open discussion along the way regarding what next steps may be. So just to bring us back in time a little bit, this is the site that we're considering building this new elementary school. It's at the corner of Steeplechase and Bulldog Way. It's in close proximity, as we know, to our middle school and our high school that currently exists on the Bulldog Way property. It's a beautiful piece of property, but as we have discovered over time, there are some concerns and some issues related to site development that we've talked about in a setting like this in the past. But ultimately, it still is a viable site, plenty of room for us to build the school, an opportunity to separate bus traffic from car traffic, ample opportunity for parking, playgrounds, and all the core services that are needed at the school. Important as we place the building on the site that really this site can accommodate a simple design. And as you know, we have gone back and looked at many different iterations of design. We had an initial design back in January that we scrapped simply because of the cost associated with that. And we have evolved into a very simple design that really essentially is two rectangles. We have core services on the right-hand side with administration and gymnasium and cafeteria and service. And on the left-hand side is the academic wing. So it's really a very simple design, two-story design on the left, The only two-story on the right-hand side is the gymnasium, which is a two-story volume. So this is the floor plan of the first level. Again, just a simple 2 rectangles. You can see on the right side the gymnasium and the kitchen, and on the left-hand side on the first floor, we have on the exterior aspects of the building, pre-K, kindergarten, first grade. We also have on the first floor our library, music classroom, support for students through counseling, and then some preschool spaces to support that operations. Just to bring us all back to where we are on the capacity of this building, it's designed for 650 students, grades K through 5, with 50 other students, grades preschool, so a total of 700 students when this is fully occupied in future years. So again, simple design, corridors on either side, accessing the classrooms. And then the second floor, we have 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade students, 2nd grade students up there as well. Art is on the 2nd floor, student services and other supports for students with small group instruction spaces as well. So 2 simple rectangles, pretty standard, simple design. School that is designed for us to be proud of, but yet at the same time be really efficient with our taxpayer dollars and go as far as we can to support our instructional program moving forward. So, see, I've lost my flow there.
What's
Yes.
current enrollment at Goochland Elementary?
Current enrollment at Goochland Elementary School is, when you factor in all of the preschool students, Ms. McKay, we're roughly 400 students.
390.
390.
So
including-
plenty of room to flex up with this design.
So what we've done, Mr. Waters, is last year the school board had the vision to go back and do some boundary adjustments and recognize that we want, ultimately, this is built for 650 students, grades K through 5, and 50 preschool at 700. So what we want to do is we want to pull students from the Randolph attendance zone, we will pull students from the Byrd attendance zone so that we can provide some longer life to those spaces, pull trailers that are currently off the site. So through that boundary adjustment, we can pull the kids from those 2 spaces, and this will be fully occupied at about 75% occupancy when we open. Great question. All right, so let's unpack the project budget for a little bit. And the project budget really consists of soft costs, hard costs, and then an overall project contingency. And so spending just a moment quickly on what is comprised of the soft costs, and a variety of things go into the overall project. And we're going to talk in a moment about the hard construction costs, but there are also other services that have gone into this work to date. And so we've hired Stantec, they're our firm, and so there are certainly fees associated with their work as well as the owner's representative. We have budgeted for commissioning. We've discussed commissioning in some circles in the past, and commissioning ultimately is an opportunity for us to make sure that every aspect of the design for the mechanical systems is working the way that we want it to. Third party comes in and does that work and makes sure that our investment is truly what we have paid for. We have to get furniture for the new building, we have to get equipment for the new building, so that's all part of the soft cost budget. And then I referenced technology, and then part of the project budget overall ultimately is some of the work that we've done in collaboration with county government in permitting, utilities, wetlands mitigation, and some of the other aspects of the work that we've had to do so far. So to date, we have spent a little less than $3 million on soft costs already invested in this project when it comes to permitting and the fees that we've already paid for our service providers associated with this. So minimal change over time from our original November 21 budget to the April budget that we had, and then ultimately our final costs right now have changed just a little bit over time. So you can see where we are right now at $7.64 million in total soft costs associated with this project budget. So on October the 17th, we submitted our plans to 8 pre-qualified bidders. We went through a pre-qualification process, as we know, so that we could ensure quality. Those 8 bidders met minimum specifications that were reviewed by us and our owner's representative. And so ultimately we are really excited about having 8 individuals who are interested in this project and who are pre-qualified, felt that that was going to give us a lot of competition and ultimately return a really good price for us. And so we solicited those bids on October the 17th. We let them sit on the public market for 30 days. We opened them at 2 o'clock on the 17th. And out of those 8 pre-qualified bidders, 4 ultimately decided to bid on this project. And you can see the results of those bids on this slide here. So you can see the vendor in the results of their bid. So at this point in time, the apparent low bidder is Howard Shockey and Sons. They, of course, are one of our 8 pre-qualified bidders, and you can see that the bid price for this is $45,599,000. So that was the lowest bid from the 4 that we received. So, any questions at this point in time?
I like the 28 cents.
Yeah. They were hoping that nobody was going to come in with a different number.
I would just say for Howard Shockey that they have an excellent website that gives a very powerful support for the excellent work that they've done and been recognized for their school construction.
All right, so we translate that cost into the hard construction cost in this aspect of the budget. And so from left to right, board members, you can see where we were in our original prior estimate, and that was November of 2021, and how that evolved over time with inflationary pressures that everyone certainly is very, very well aware of, and then where we are right now with the final bid price. And so that $45,599 includes site prep, it includes construction, includes the roads, includes, you know, all the things that would be considered hard construction costs that were not previously referenced in the soft cost slide. What we have done so far, and granted, we just received these bids on November the 17th. We had a Thanksgiving holiday in there, so there have not been a whole lot of business days since we received these bids, but we've already started to work with Shockey to see if there are additional opportunities for value engineering beyond what we have already done to get to this point in time in the project. And we've identified quickly $611,000 of value engineering opportunities that we are, as a staff, are comfortable with. And I'm going to share some other potential opportunities here on the next slide, but we've already identified what we feel is a pretty significant amount of opportunities to reduce the overall project costs. We've talked in the past about this on-site water tank and pump station. We were accounting for that in previous budgets. That is included in this overall budget, and we're not saying that we have a need for that now, which is very positive. It's significant savings in the overall project budget. And you can see that we have a change order contingency at 3%, which is the industry standard. So the overall hard construction costs, you can see there, are $46,836,226. So, as I referenced, we've already been working with Howard Shockey to see if there are additional opportunities to provide some savings. And so we as a staff, based on the work that we've done so far with the architect and MVP, feel that we're comfortable with these opportunities for additional savings. Like I said, $611,000. Pretty significant opportunity is modifying the roofing materials to a different material that's still going to have long quality and going to be positive for the overall building envelope, with some pretty significant changes there and some good savings. A few things nibbling around the edges on some exterior panels and some exterior finishes. Modifying the site work a little bit, that's a pretty significant opportunity for savings, and we identified some changes in the electrical system that's not going to have a negative impact on the project. There still are some other opportunities potentially down the road for us to find some additional savings. And any additional savings ultimately will be treated much like we did with the parking lot project, right? This project comes in under budget, like the parking lot project, then we can leverage those savings for any future capital projects pending approval by the supervisors. We're still scrubbing our furniture budget. That was included in the soft cost above, but there may be some minor opportunities to save a little bit in the furniture budget. Are there any other contingency or site allowances that we can look at? We're looking at whether or not we want to actually purchase a generator for this new school. We're still exploring that a little bit. That could have some potential savings. And then something else that we're pretty excited about is working directly with Howard Shockey, where we could buy materials that are approved by them, materials that are specified in the drawings, so you're going to get the same materials that we want. But if we purchase them, we can save sales tax and potentially a little bit of some of the overhead associated with their work. So we need to explore this further with Shockey, but we feel like we might be able to manage a few savings simply because we're a tax-exempt organization and we can save a little bit of money along the way there. Yes, ma'am.
So the big one here is the roofing.
Mm-hmm.
So $335,000 represents what kind of savings? Is it 5% savings, 50% savings? And what does that do to the long-term maintenance of the building?
Yeah, great question. So out of a $45 million project,
No, the roofing.
the roofing. Yeah, so we could say, it's, I want to ask Jim to talk a little bit about the roofing because there's a little bit more of the detail of the kind of material and the thickness of the roofing. So Jim, if you wouldn't mind sharing that.
Probably, off the top of my head, it's probably about a 10 to 15% savings on the overall roofing. I would say roofing costs
Okay.
probably in the $3 million range on the project. As far as the quality goes, what's specified is a 30-year warranty roof, which is 90 mil. It's how they rate the thickness and how it qualifies for a higher warranty. And what is being proposed is to go to a 20-year roof, which is 60 mil. And from our experience, 20 years is closer to the industry standard, so we feel comfortable with that change.
So that would change the CIP over time to replace the roof 10 years earlier
Yes,
to
ma'am.
save the 300. Okay.
Yes, ma'am.
Jeremy?
Yes, sir.
What would a generator to power a school run?
Yeah,
And is it, to me, it seems like you do need backup power for
I don't know
a
why you would do
public
that.
school.
Yeah, we've been round and around on this because Byrd and Randolph currently have whole school generators. And Randolph will by the end of Christmas break. So we've made that investment in those two schools. The way, of course, we've been value engineering this thing along the way. And initially I wanted a whole school generator for this project and realized that we couldn't afford that. So we built that into the bid as an add-on. And that add-on for a whole school generator, I think Jim was what, 1.4 million dollars. So needless to say, we're not going to go with that. It's specified right now for a generator that can operate some of the core functions, emergency lights, refrigerators, freezers, some of those kind of things. So that's in the overall price. If we choose to not do that, I would estimate we could probably save $300,000 or $400,000 on the actual generator itself.
How many days, and I don't know if you've done this, how many days that we would have a need for a generator, can we even get school buses to the school? So does it kind of become a wash in that regard, or?
Yeah,
I know it's a nice to have, but.
Yeah, sometimes in the spring we have had to close school because of thunderstorms and lack of power. It's not necessarily a winter event, but the schools too are pretty important community hubs for emergency services as well. So, the high school has a generator. It's on site. It's pretty close by. Central High School will have a generator. So there are other community resources. So that's why we've really spent some time thinking about how we can best use our resources here. And so regardless of whether or not we have a generator, it will have the conduit and the capability for a future generator, whole school or small scale. We've had that I feel strongly about that. Thank you, Spirit, for reading this. Appreciate it. All right, so some potential other opportunities pending evaluation if we choose to go forward. All right, so looking at the project in its totality, again, looking left to right and where we've been in history and where we are now. The current project budget is $56,075,904, which is an increase from our original budget in November of $13.4 million, or 31.5%. So that's where we are now, and so this just summarizes the soft costs we discussed, the hard construction costs, and the general project contingency, which over time we have reduced from 7% to 3%. Pretty narrow margin there. Still want to have project contingency. Don't want to have too much contingency, but we want to have enough just in case there's something that we face that we haven't prepared for. So I think an important comparison, and this was referenced in one of our previous work sessions, is where does this cost lie in comparison to other projects that are taking place across the Commonwealth? That was an important discussion point in one of our previous work sessions. And so this is the most current data that we have based on projects that we are aware of. Certainly building has slowed down just a little bit, but ultimately here's the price per square foot of these projects. And so we we purposefully have pulled the site out of these cost comparisons because in each one of these situations, the site's going to be different. We know our site challenges. Gandy Elementary School is in a flat green field where you have water and sewer already there, and you have a road that already is in front of the school and has the ability to accept the school. So I'm not aware of some of these other projects, but I know that that one certainly does not have the site issues that our project does. So it's really difficult to compare apples to apples when you throw the total project cost into everything. So we pulled all that out and just looked at hard construction costs in the building, and you can see how we fall. At $332 per square foot, this project is in the middle of these other projects in a cost comparison standpoint. All right. So a lot that we've gone through there.
Mine, would you go back to that slide?
Sure, yes ma'am.
So the building only cost, no contingency, no site work, no soft cost. Is that how you, is that what you're saying?
Yes ma'am. Yes ma'am. Just
So, Dr. Rayleigh, the construction contingency, change order contingency at 3% is in that,
okay.
just on the building's part of the cost.
So,
Is it in the other numbers too?
Yes.
Is there contingency in that number? Thank you.
so why is it, I'm just not following you, so just help me.
Sure.
So the building construction is 45 million. Why is it 34?
We've taken the site out of this number. So on our project, we have about $11,000 in site prep costs. $11 million. Yeah, there's a big difference there, isn't there? Yeah, on our
Which is
project.
still a crazy number, right?
Yeah. And if you remember, board members, we looked at a variety of options. We looked at another site. We looked at building on the current GES site. We looked at a renovation of the current GES site and did not move forward with those options. So we even looked at postponing the project. That was a conversation that the school board had at one point in time too. Chosen to move forward with the site that we have.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, yes ma'am. Any other questions?
I
Yes, sir.
wasn't privy to previous conversations, but existing GES site, what are the plans for that?
Yeah, so
Can they get any value leverage out of that?
Yeah, so depending on what happens with this construction project, we'll need to make a decision together as to what happens with the current GES. And I think there's going to be a lot of competition for that space because there are a lot of things on that space that are positive for offices, for schools, or county government. That's close to this complex, so it makes sense that maybe county government maybe uses that space. Mr. Carpenter and I toured that space about 2 weeks ago, and we looked at one section of the facility that maybe we don't want to keep. It was built in the 70s, maybe not with great construction. Maybe we don't want to keep the back part of that building. I think long term we need to look at the green field associated with that GES property. Green space in this community is valuable. So is that used for Parks and Rec? Is that used for school purposes in the future? I think the county has had the foresight to look at money in one of the CIP years for renovation of that building. I think $2 million has been planned in future years for that. So certainly on Route 6 as a part of our community, we don't want to make that an eyesore. We want to make sure that it's usable space for some sort of governmental purpose.
Jim,
Yes, sir.
I've talked about this before, and the one thing coming into this meeting that I had on my mind, and I'm really impressed with the efforts in the process, and I know this group will land this plane, as you say, in a good place and get this done. But I've talked to you before about it, and I just have struggled, and I'm not clear why the school board is insisting on that August 2024 opening day. But these comparisons right here kind of make me think maybe, maybe let that issue go. But certainly we know in this environment that if a contractor is facing penalties for not completing on time and the supply chain issues, the workforce issues, that if they're on a tight time frame, they're going to run the bid up. I mean, they have to get it to work. So I guess the question I would have, do we know if is Falling Creek Middle School and Isle of Wight and Augusta and Gandy are all have that same tight time frame?
So I don't know whether we have a construction timeline there. I think that would be a really helpful thing for us overall, and I'm sorry that we don't have it right there, poof, I wish. But I think it would be great to know, and perhaps Jim can help us, from groundbreaking, how long does it take to construct the school so that we know whether we are pushing the envelope or not? I think your point is valid, and I'll tell you the reason why we've had those discussions is because the costs are rising, and they're rising faster than any savings we would get by waiting. So that's sort of the reason why we're saying now is the time. It's not going to get better from a cost per square foot standpoint. But what's our timeline there, just so we understand?
For this,
From groundbreaking to opening of a school, what is that time period? Is that a year process, year and a half process?
It of course varies depending on the size of the school. That's the biggest factor. So, high school is going to take longer than elementary school. The rules are generally for an elementary school, 16 to 18 months, middle school, maybe 20 months, high school, 24 to 30 months. So those are general timeframes that you use, and those are rules that were established, I would say kind of industry rules established before the pandemic, and now kind of a lot of the way we thought about how long it takes is kind of somewhat out the window with the pandemic and the supply chain, which is still existing. So there's been concern about time frame kind of all through this process. So one of the things that we did, since we had the benefit of having these 8 pre-qualified contractors on board, and it was either September or October, we actually went to them and said, what do you think about the time frame? And Shockey, kind of coincidentally enough, was the one that provided the most, seemed to be the most engaged in that question. They actually, we scheduled a conference with Shockey to talk about the time frame. They said they were comfortable with it. They said there was not a lot of room for error because the schedule is always based on starting in December. And they said there wasn't a lot of error for delays at the beginning of the project. So if we pushed into January, February, March, they would be a lot less comfortable. But if we could keep on our timeline as we have it right now, they said they're comfortable with the time that's given to them. The other quick point I would make is giving them more time doesn't necessarily mean cheaper. If you give them more time than they need, they may just put additional, they're going to have to, they may slow down, they may put additional overhead out there. So they're going to commit their superintendents and their managers and their trailers out there for a longer period. So that in itself will drive up costs. But it is a good question. I think it'd be fair to go back to Shockey and say, just kind of revisit and say, is this enough time to build the project?
Jim, we had a conversation last week with them. They've already created the Gantt charts. They have, I think Bill and some of the representatives from Shockey talked about how the building was designed in such a way that's easy to bring the trades in, in a time frame. And so Shockey volunteered that they've already created the Gantt charts. They know when they're going to be bringing their trades in to get this project done. So I felt very comforted by that very casual conversation with all of us in the room, that they were ready to go.
I think an important point too, and I glossed over this unfortunately, is that the bids that we received on November the 17th are effective for 60 days. So there is some timing associated with any sort of future decisions that we have moving forward. And so after those 60 days, those prices are null and void. We're going to have to go through the process again.
Well, we just heard from the representative that everybody's thinking of a December start date. And
Wow.
on November 29th. And so we need to close the gap, and we need to make it happen quickly, is there a penalty clause in the contract if the place is not?
Yeah,
open?
there would be liquidated damages and the contract that we would sign with them. I think, based on Mr. Wright's comments, we have substantial completion in June of 2024 with the summer being move-in. So it would really be, from December to June that we would have the construction phase of the project.
Is there any supply chain concerns in any aspect of the building that may affect that kind of a pushed up time frame for construction and turnover?
I know this really well. I'm part of my job is I build facilities. Right now, the long pole in the tent is HVAC. You're talking 40-week lead time on large custom units like this. So you can get that within the time frame that we need. You can pre-wire, do all kinds of things, set up duct work, that sort of stuff without the units themselves. There is some supply chain thoughts, obviously happening economically right now. I just want to admit this. Obviously, anything to and from China has its sort of volatility, but we've been very successful in getting units built in North America. Canada actually does a whole lot of manufacturing of HVAC unit stuff, and so there is some things that you can circumnavigate that sort of risk that's sort of out of many ways out of your control with China. The other thing that's popped up within the last couple of days, and I just want to admit that it could cause some problems somewhere, is the thought that there may be some form of rail strike, which then would create bottlenecks in other forms of transportation to transport said units to you. But with 40 weeks in a schedule that's going to be twice that long isn't really necessarily a concerning thought from a supply chain issue.
I think should we move forward with a direct purchase program, we would need to be very careful and strategic in those items that the school division would purchase that would have very little lag time. We probably don't want to direct purchase HVAC just because we don't want to be on the hook for that. But something that is readily available, we can get in a warehouse, like that might be something we do with a direct purchase program so that we don't hold up the schedule.
So based on your time frames, is slide 12 the solution slide?
Yeah, so I want to transition into I want to transition into what this may look like from a financial perspective, because ultimately this is a number that none of us were expecting. We've been monitoring this. All of us have been. This has been an important project, as we know. But now we know, right? Now we know. We have the bids, good for 60 days. We know the total project cost. Now we know. So where do we go from here? That's the major question.
Well, Jim, before you leave that slide, the other thing to say, because I think we're all shocked with the number, but in some ways we're not that shocked. So I wonder if these other folks that we see their costs and all, but I wonder what they were budgeting when they were planning, a year ago.
Yeah, these are rough numbers. It's my understanding that this is about 32-33% more than what Hanover was budgeting. And I think that's what we're seeing in the market. Jim's shaking his head back there that you're seeing low 30% increases over budget numbers when it comes to bid.
And so we do some work with Chesterfield too, and they had adjusted their budget numbers upwards based on the recent cost escalations. So thank you for that. It came in high, but expected high.
So
But we already adjusted.
Ryan is on that Chesterfield project, right, Ryan?
Well, our team is, Chesterfield, the Fallen Creek School has the same opening time as Goochland does.
And if I'm not mistaken, that is it's a prototype school, so the contractor's familiar with the design. They've done it before.
They've done the school before. It's a prototypical design that Chesterfield chose from. So the contractor is very familiar with that design. So, the 238,000 square feet there, we'll do that in the same time that we're able to. And that site is very different from the site for Goochland. It's an existing site, has all site utilities already there, and it's basically a flat site.
Thank you. Ms. Westblet, you had a question?
I was trying to figure out was like. Well, I'm still dovetailing after Mr. Lumpkins on the time frame. So we're really pushing it so hard. And why is that? You know, and we've discussed this before, and I still never really understood why this is such a critical thing to open in August of '24. Why is that?
I think there are school divisions that have done mid-year openings. It can be done. It's not probably the best way to do it because of the transition mid-year, but it could be done. So a delay of 6 months would, open us in January of 2025. But again, that 6-month delay, how's that going to impact prices? I think there is a sweet spot in that construction time. You extend it too long, then that's when you have the increased overhead and increased cost. These contractors have said, yeah, your timeline is doable. Delaying it till August of 2025, what would that impact you on costs? Don't we all wish we had a crystal ball, but so that's some of the thinking.
Dr. Raymond, if I may?
Yes, ma'am.
I think that timeline is very critical as well. We've done the major maintenance plan, and we know what needs to be done to Goochland Elementary School to keep it at the place. First of all, I have to say, our facilities and our custodial people keep that school as shiny and operable as possible for the age and limitations they have there. There's nothing that they haven't done to keep it safe and a good space for learning as it can be. But I believe that there's some major projects that have been withheld at that school. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Because of this, and so where do you put your money? Do you put your money into a building that you know you're going to abandon, or do you keep moving forward and with your plan and do that rebuild? I think there's a lot of cost savings there that we haven't really lumped into this, which would be needed, especially in another year, given another year and another year, and how much actual living goes on in that space every day.
Rob, what would be the morale hit to faculty to have this vision for August 2024 and a delay? I mean, that's a real cost, even though it is soft in a plan like this.
I think that would be significant. Mrs. McKay is our principal at Goochland Elementary School, and she has her finger on the pulse of how her faculty is monitoring this. You can bet that they're going to watch what happens today and what happens in the future, simply because it is something that they have a significantly vested interest in right now.
And one other thing, I mean, the truth is, to answer your question, Ms. Laskblad, there's a number of reasons why we're thinking sooner than later. We recognize that the county is carrying interest on the dollars that we've got here too. I mean, that's something else. We wait longer, we pay more.
And in my mind, as Dr. Rayleigh referenced at the very beginning,
It's a
this has been
great
a conversation
yeah.
since 2007-8. There are drawings of possibility since 2007. At what point is the right time? Do we wait another year or another 5 years or 6 months? Since 2007, that's hard to explain in my mind.
All right, so let's talk about one option. This is just one option that we flushed out as a staff and shared initially with the school board. So going back in time a little bit, this time last year we were riding high because 85% of our voters put their full faith behind $96 million worth of projects for our county, and 60 million of those projects were for school projects. And so certainly thank the voters again publicly for their support of that. It was a significant approval. And so out of that $60 million, this is how it's currently been distributed. $36.5 million for the new Goochland Elementary School project, $4.2 million for the parking lot project, which as we know is nearing completion in a lot of ways. And that left $19.2 million for other bond-related projects. And there were 3 projects listed in question related to schools, GES, parking lot, and then high school projects. So that's how the $60 million has been separated at this point in time. So the supervisors back in February authorized the bond sale, and certainly a lot of positives came out of that. It was a $50 million bond sale overall. $41.8 million were for school projects, the rest for fire station, and so this is how that $41.8 million is separated at this point in time. You have already authorized and appropriated $36.5 million for the new GES. You've already authorized and appropriated the 4.2 for the parking lot. And so the remainder of that is $1,033,000 that was part of that initial bond sale that has not yet been appropriated. So that's just there at this point in time, but was a part of that initial bond sale. So that will be an important number going forward. So when you dig in specifically related,
Sorry, I just said,
I'm sorry.
where is the 36.5 sitting currently?
that's been appropriated to the school division. I guess it's sitting in our accounts. Is that right, Debbie?
Yes, it's sitting as cash that we're earning interest on, but it's not something,
Maximizing the.
it's
what we
not,
can get.
we can't spend it until the
Yeah.
Board of Supervisors appropriates it to us. It's an over budget receipt of funds.
Yeah, we have authority to spend that, and we've spent roughly $3 million in some of those soft costs already. So that's how we get to the 41.8. All right, so specifically, looking at all of the projects related to the bond, but specifically the new GES, looking at some funding streams for this project in particular. Talked about the 36.5, it's been appropriated, we have authority to spend. The supervisors recently approved a transfer from the parking lot project to this project. That was balance that we had from that project left over, $550,000 for that. The supervisors had the foresight and the vision many years ago, several years ago, to start to put cash towards this project. $500,000 per year dating back several years. And so that is cash you have put towards this project. You include a little bit of 2021 turnback, that's $2.5 million in cash for the project. And then some additional proffers in FY22 turnback that's already been appropriated to the tune of $750,000. So that is money that you all have already authorized and given us the opportunity to spend towards this project. Now, last year in April, we had a discussion in this room. That was the most recent time that we talked about this project. And following that conversation, there were some discussions with county staff related to some other potential funding streams. And so part of that conversation included that $1,033,000 that was part of the initial bond sale that has not yet been appropriated. So we talked about that with staff. We also talked a little bit in this setting and some more with staff about the bond premium. When you sold those $50 million worth of bonds, thankfully, as a result of your strong leadership, there was a premium associated with those bonds, slightly less than $10 million for that bond premium overall. So the conversation with staff was $5 million potentially of that bond premium being used for this project. And then, as we discussed a little bit, there is some interest associated with this, and we run a conservative estimate based on low interest rates and drawdown timeline, and we're estimating that there's going to be a little over $1 million in interest earned from this that potentially we could use for this project. So again, these have not been appropriated by the supervisors, but they are potential funding streams. So if you add up what is appropriated and what potentially could be appropriated, the potential funding for this project is $47.6 million. I'll pause there for a second, see if you have any questions.
So you're earning interest on the bond for which the county is paying interest?
The county is earning interest on the bond. But ultimately, there's going to be a drawdown of that and earning interest, and we estimate that over the project life that, and this is probably a very low number, quite honestly, we wouldn't be conservative, that over that time, the county's going to earn $1.25 million in interest.
On the 41.8 million that's been designated for the schools.
You talked to the treasurer about that?
We haven't run our numbers past the treasurer, but we're happy to do so.
Staff's looked at them, and we're comfortable with those numbers.
Again, a conservative number, we expected it's probably a little more, but we didn't want to overinflate that potential revenue stream.
But it's based on what we know the treasurer can properly and prudently invest.
Yes, so Carla can respond to this. The finance department in February prudently put it in a SNAP investment, and right now the school's $41.8 million is earning over $100,000 in interest per month. So we've already, probably with November, we'll probably have about $550,000 already earned on our 41.8, which we're steadily drawing down on. So, we've already had almost $5 million draw down on that, but we're still earning over $100,000 a month.
And so that's included in the $1,250,000?
Yes, what's already earned.
Right.
But again, it's like the 1,033,000. We can't use that, any of our bond interest earnings, until the Board of Supervisors gives us authority to, until they appropriate it to us. We've got it sitting there, adding to our cash, but we can't spend it.
Well, it's, just for clarification, you said adding to your cash, it's really never part of the formula. That interest is county's money until it's decided that this goes to schools versus something else, right?
Correct, yes, sir. And this is all.
But your logic is that you're looking at the monies that are appropriated for this project that are being invested is driving that calculation.
Yes, sir.
Yes, only the 41.8 million is going into that interest earnings.
Okay, and that bond interest 1.2, I think you answered this already to Susan's question, but that includes the 500 that you've earned to date.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. This is where we think we'd be maxed out, but ultimately we still think that's a very conservative number. All right, so you add all that up, what has been appropriated and what has been considered, you're at $47.6 million, and as we know, that's not the number that we need to get to. So what's next? What else? How else do we get there potentially? And so there may be other funding from any sort of end of the year turn back that we have, and we've historically been turning back $150,000 or $300,000, so that's certainly not going to close the gap, but that could at least help towards this project or future projects. Any additional appropriation from the supervisors, and any use of the remaining bonds. So if you take out that $1,033,000 that we discussed, 41.8, so you take 60 million, you subtract 41.8, that leaves 18.2 left. So is there an opportunity to use any remainder of that 18.2 to close the gap for the Goochland Elementary School project? And that's where I wanted to talk about that in the next few slides. Ultimately, that would result in an adjustment to our school division's capital improvement plan. It would result in the abandonment or potential delay of some future projects. So earlier this month, we presented to the school board an updated capital improvement plan for their review. And so we updated all of the pricing associated with our CIP based on what we had just experienced, the 30% increase, and we inflated future years at 5%. So here's where we are based on where those projects that were initially discussed as a part of the bond, this is where we are in pricing at this point in time. And ultimately, I'll share with you just anecdotally that it's we've doubled the price of these projects as a result of what we've gone through inflation. But this is where we are right now. So ultimately, all these projects were under consideration. So we're certainly not going to be able to fund all those projects with the remaining 18.2 that we have, plus the differential in the school. So what if hypothetically, project total is $56 million, and what if all of those funds previously discussed are appropriated and you get to that $47 million figure, we're still looking at a $9 million delta. What if we used 8.4 of the remaining 18.2 in bond proceeds to close the gap in the new Goochland Elementary School? Abandon these projects, kick them farther down the road, make decisions on what we want to do with these projects here. I would submit that one likely solution is the wrestling room would be transferred to the old Goochland Elementary School, and we could wrestle in the cafeteria, so we not necessarily even need a wrestling room moving forward. So we'd have to make some strong decisions about what we want to do with these. The auxiliary gym, I would say we're building the new GES with an auxiliary gym, so maybe we can abandon that project. And then we think differently maybe about this project here. So ultimately, closing the gap in the new GES, that would allow $500,000 for interior renovations to the high school, specifically for our fine arts programs, and that would leave $9.2 million for a future CTE renovation that we could use bond proceeds for. So ultimately, that would be a way for us to use the remaining bond proceeds to accomplish the new GES project, as well as some of those other projects that we have discussed in the past. So, Mr. Peterson.
Really, maybe mislabeled. We don't have 18 million in proceeds right now. We have 18 million remaining on referendum.
Yes, sir.
We don't have those proceeds.
Yes, sir. We'll change
This
the title.
would contemplate accessing the capital markets again, which is not a great thing to do right now.
Right.
How much, what are our proceeds at this point? What did we do, 50?
We did 15, and that's in that previous slide. We've now transitioned from cash on hand earning interest to bond referendum remaining authorization. And that's a whole different, we just shifted gears.
I appreciate that clarification. Thank you. Just an option for consideration. Just welcome.
I noticed the CTE edition went from 17.9 to 9.2. I mean, what do those cut? What does a 50% cut in that entail?
Yeah, it would involve changing the scope of the project or an infusion of cash to get to the differential, but likely it would be changing the scope of the project and reducing that.
Can I answer something?
Sure.
So in the CIP, the 5-year CIP that was approved last year, there was over $5 million of cash on top of the bond proceeds for those high school projects. So now you're looking at maybe a $15 million project instead of just a $9 million. If that cash balancing was still available.
But that wasn't what year was that?
The CIP that was approved
Where was
this
the 5
year,
million in what year? In the 5
it was in 2024, 2025, and 2026.
Okay, so it's not funded.
No, it was not funded,
Right.
and that. But what I'm saying is the plan.
Right,
there
I
was
know.
a cash aspect to that.
Now, I just want to be clear, it's not funded.
It is not funded.
Right.
So an option, maybe limitations associated with this, it was at least a way of looking at some remaining bond funds that potentially could close the gap. So just an option for consideration. So let's follow that through just for a little bit longer. So if you look at a balanced approach, the expenses associated with what I just shared, new GES, interior renovations, and the CTE addition, change that. We're looking at $65.8 million. And then if we look at revenue associated with that, currently appropriated by the supervisors, and if you add in the $6 million and $12.50 that we discussed earlier today, and of course my titling probably is not accurate, but if you look at $8.4 million of that $18.2 million, and then you leave the rest of the bond, your balance is $65.8 million. So it shows that using the remainder of the bond, however that may happen now or in future years, if it's a reimbursement resolution or whatever may be the mechanism to do that, there is a potential to use a portion of that $18.2 million to close the gap in the new GES with additional appropriation from the supervisor. So coming with a solution, maybe some hiccups associated with that solution, but at least it was a way of bringing this together and providing an opportunity to balance everything and still accomplish but could be important times.
And what's the total number, I think it was in the previous slide, what's the total number of future CIP projects that you're just taking off the table? What's the total value of that? Just all the things that you struck out on that previous slide?
Yeah, that's significant. So that's 5, it's 6.5, that's 8.5, you know, nearly $9 million of projects.
Plus the reduction from CDE.
Yes. So,
14 million.
so 9 million. Oh, this was a much larger project. Let's see, that was
Oh, there, wow.
2.7. So you're looking at another $2 million plus $8 million there. It was a pretty significant reduction.
And is those all on the, those things all on the 5-year CIP?
They are currently, yes, sir.
Not at that price. So,
Correct.
so everybody's going to see a CIP radically different
You
for
said you doubled, you
this
said you
coming
basically
year.
doubled the numbers, I think is what you said.
We went through a calculation and essentially they doubled, yes.
From the original project when they were presented several years ago.
Gotcha.
Going back to 2018, 2019. All right, so one of the things to consider, and the school board's going to meet after this work session to consider their next steps, but one of the potential considerations is to request the appropriation from the supervisors for that $7.2 million, which is this right here, which includes the bond proceeds, the bond premium, and the bond interest. And the school board will consider whether or not they want to request that for consideration. And then making sure I word that correctly, will the school board request $8.4 million out of the $18.2 million for the other projects in order to fund the new GPS. So that's a discussion that they're going to have later on today, but certainly happy to answer any questions or gain greater understanding of the issues today.
I'll ask for confirmation from Supervisor Peterson. First bullet point, bond has already been issued, funds collected, good. Second, we'd have to tap the capital markets, which is the area.
Or cash.
Yeah, the bond referendum was for $100 million for a specific project for public safety in the schools. And those proceeds can only be used for public safety in schools. And we issued $50 million in February, first week of February, at 2.2% before interest rates skyrocketed.
Yes.
And
We'd get 7 now.
one of the reasons we did 50 was it has to be large enough to get interest in bids.
Yep.
There's 11 different banks that bid for the entire issue. So we generated a lot of interest. If you go out with 5, 6, 7 million, nobody's going to be interested in bidding. If you go out with 10 and 15, you're still talking about maybe just go to a bank instead of going to the capital markets. But if you get up to 40, 50, 60, then some of the larger banks will bid aggressively and you get a much better interest rate. With interest rates more than doubling since we did that, you're probably looking at waiting until the backside of that interest rate curve before you go out and access the capital markets again. And that's probably a couple of years out. Some of my concerns, just share, this is a safe space, we can all share our concerns, is that we're going to have to bid a contract where costs have run up to the highest inflation in 40 years, and we're going to choose that time frame to go out and solicit bids. Now, we've looked at the last year, and when I served 10 years in the Army, we always were criticized for learning how to fight the last war. This is kind of looking through your rearview mirror. We had double-digit inflation last year. So now we're all convinced that that's going to be double-digit inflation for the rest of our lives. The Fed's out there now trying to bend that cost curve. New home construction's cut down by about 50%. Mortgages are at 7%. Nobody's borrowing a mortgage anymore. It's all cash buyers. So if they're bending the cost curve and that inflation has been going straight up, they're going to bend that curve and it's going to head back down. And that's what the Fed's set out to do. And the old adage is don't fight the Fed. Whatever they want to do, they can get done. It doesn't matter how long it takes and how bad it. But so if they're bending the cost curve, and we're printing our construction costs at the peak year, and now we're talking about going accessing the capital markets where interest rates are at the highest they've been in decades. And then where do things go from here? Like we can predict history with relative accuracy. You know? it's predicting the future is a little fuzzy, but you know what's going on in the marketplace right now. You know that mortgage rates are at 7%, up from 2%. You know that for us to go out and print a deal, we printed the one in February at 2.2. We go out today to be closer to 5. That interest on that, you know, another 20 or 30 million dollars worth of bonds, we're just, you know, there's no room for that in our interest expense, our debt service expense. So, in my mind, we've pretty much tapped the capital markets at the right time, issued the amount of debt that we were told was what we needed, right? So we're fully funded on that at a great print. And in my mind, we're pretty much, you know, stepping back from issuing bonds until interest rates and costs come back down to earth. And we really can't go out there with $5, $6, $7, $8 million offering and expect to get any interest on it. And if we did, it'd be at a more than double the interest rate. So not a great time. So those are some of my concerns, and we're building at the peak cost of construction, and we're talking about printing bonds at the peak interest rate. I mean, again, history we get, future we don't know, but just some concerns about where we've been versus where we're headed versus the inflection point that we're going to be at now, both costs and rates. Does that answer your question, Charles?
Yeah.
Can we ask Jim to weigh in on the construction market? What the thinking is as far as construction costs? Because we know that both Falling Creek and Gandy will move forward in the same environment that we have. And, you know, so why are other school divisions moving forward if there's a perception that this is a peak and it's going to go down?
Houston's special. It's a special place. I would like to hear about what's going on out there, because I do know that if you've put 2x4s and stick to building, you're going to put the roof on the siding on it and sell it. You're going to follow through on your construction. And there is a cycle that, you know, of getting zoning approvals, and you're not going to stop mid-construction. But would you be starting a new project knowing where your construction costs are today versus where they might be? So I'd be interested to hear whether the new housing construction competition for workforce, materials, all that, is that competition for us, you know, lessening, or is it strengthening? I mean, is the housing market, you know, growing stronger or weaker, given that mortgage rates are at 7%? I'd be interested in some thoughts on where things are headed from here.
And I don't have as much insight on the residential side, just because I don't track as much, but I do. I think of them as two pretty separate markets. So the things that happen on the residential side don't necessarily happen on the commercial. Fairly different trades people are working in them. Residential's extremely heavy on lumber costs, of course, and then on commercial you're dealing more with concrete and steel. So somewhat different materials. But the point exactly is that we don't really know what's going to happen in the future. We can kind of look at the past as a kind of a predictor of the future. And if you look at commercial costs over the last 30, 40 years, there's really only been one significant commercial construction cost. And that was more towards 2009, 2010, when people stopped building because of the deep recession. Banks weren't loaning money. Costs actually went down. But if you look at that curve any other time in the last 30, 40 years, the costs have done nothing but go up.
What we talked about how much we can afford, for just to dumb it down for folks. If I go to buy a house, I know how much of a mortgage I can afford. How much can the school afford from a mortgage perspective? How much can you borrow and pay back? What is your debt service?
We can't.
You can't borrow.
I know, but I get that, I understand, but there should be a number like the school can repay.
Well, ultimately, we get every dollar from the county. So you know, we get a little bit of state money, as you know, but ultimately, the vast majority comes from the appropriation that you provide to us. So ultimately, we can't spend anything without you guys giving us the authority to do that.
Right, I understand that, but in your budget, you have to say, okay, well, some of our budget per year has to go towards paying off these loans.
County carries our debt service. We don't have any line items in our budget for debt service. County carries it all for us.
So you're buying a house. So. With a rich
Rich
uncle,
uncle,
right?
right.
That's where I kind of go. How much can we afford to borrow?
Stingy uncle.
Yeah.
May I ask a
We gotta watch
question?
our debts.
And maybe this is for Mr. Peterson too. I don't know. You always get all the good ones. So, in my experience, I've seen where some localities actually in their local match requirement include the debt service as part of their school funding. So, as the formula, so in essence, they're giving the money to the schools, but getting it back. And I think that that's sort of what Mr. Spoonhout was asking, if you were to, in theory, deduct it from your local match, how much can you actually absorb in your county contribution? So I don't know if that's how we do it here, but I do know that there's some localities that the debt service the amount is reflected in the local match, and then the locality still carries the debt service, but it becomes a wash. Does that make sense?
Yeah, the way we have done it is we don't really separate it. Dr. Bailey's right, we carry all the financial burden, but we do coordinate. So ACT is kind of one entity. But the Finance and Audit Committee has adopted financial policies for the county. And in those financial policies, we have a debt service coverage ratio that we use. No more than X percent of your budget goes to debt service. We have an asset coverage ratio where the debt service is no greater than a certain percent of the taxable base of the county. So you got an asset-backed coverage ratio and a cash flow coverage ratios. And we've got other policies as well. So we have, theoretical maximums, and we have kind of our target, because we don't want to run it up to the maximum, so our target, and then we have our current, and we track those on a quarterly basis at the Finance and Audit Committee meeting. So the question of how much debt capacity do they have is really how much debt capacity does the county have? And we track those ratios to see, and this last 50 million had a very, very skinny 2% interest. The principal and interest debt service on those runs us up pretty close to our target. So we don't have a whole lot of unused. And part of the reason for waiting for that 50 million to build the GES, we talked about 207, 208. Part of the rationale for waiting until now was to pay off the middle school, high school debt, which comes off this year, I believe. And then reborrow that, as opposed to layering debt on top of that, which would blow our ratios.
And so I guess I was just wondering, has Gucci ever looked at counting the debt service that's paid towards that local match amount, I guess? What else?
Have we looked at how the schools...
No, so when you have your local match amount that the state provides with your ADM and all of that.
Index?
The composite index.
The 20%, yeah.
The 20%, taking what you actually carry as your debt and that payment amount that relates to the schools, that dollar figure, and having that listed as part of your contribution because it still is funding in kind to schools.
Well, I mean, it strikes me that it's kind of on paper only, it's not real.
Correct.
There's no real.
But then it's, in a way, then you're able to say that there's still the local match met without impacting.
Well, let's see, the local match deposit index only funds operating, it doesn't fund capital, it doesn't fund, so there really isn't the component of the composite index that goes toward debt service or finance, it's all operating money. So, but I guess when we're all circling around here is how do we accurately reflect what the schools are incurring on the school's numbers? Or is it complete, there's no visibility. If it's completely off financials and off balance sheet and off income statement and off to the side, how do we measure, the financial impact on
What, yeah,
cost of
what amount of
schools
that
in
is
town.
actually being called, yeah.
So, yeah.
That might be a good number to look at.
Well, and to your point, and everything that you said has been correct, but,
Well, good.
you know, we,
Oh, sure.
but the idea has been that the middle school debt is going to drop off, so what's the timing of when we actually need that additional $8 million? Is it in the time period where we would actually have to cross that path? I mean, when we think about how we fund a construction project, we've got the money sitting there earning interest. We're not going to spend it all in one check and give it to them and say, gee, we hope it turns out okay. We have progress billings along the way, and so there will be some opportunity for timing to be an important concept for us to discuss and consider.
So you're gonna sign a contract, pledging the money, and don't know,
We don't have the proceeds.
we don't have the proceeds?
Well, that's the purpose of this conversation.
Well, I'm saying that it's, as we consider this is something that we can discuss. I don't know that you have to tap that right away. If you have a commitment to sign the contract, the funding is sort of a separate way to take this on and to consider doing this. I would think that just as you guys made a good decision to tap this when the market was low, you can make a decision to time when you tap the rest of it along the way. I mean, if we're not going to do this, then we're not going to do it wholeheartedly, and now we've got to find some way to utilize the dollars that have already been committed. So I think we're already in the boat. The question is when we go through, the process to tap some of these other things. I get what you're saying about sticking to the principles, and I think they're great principles. We're just all in this with the same amount of pain, trying to find a solution. That's all I'm saying, and so timing may be part of our solution.
Could we tap the capital markets in the next 18 months?
My question is going to go to Susan's point. And I don't know who has the answer,
Right.
but
We were hoping you did.
Now's your moment.
these type of projects, how often do you see them funded? I guess, in which ways do you see them funded? It might be a better question, because the capital markets literally have just been snatched away from us. And that is a very sudden situation, but it doesn't mean that there are not potential attractive solutions. We just have to get creative. So if you all told me these things only get funded with municipal bonds and cash from our budget, that's a different story. If you say, no, I've dealt with XYZ school district or talked to them and they worked with, because trust me, banks want to grow too. They want to do business with large entities like a county, and there are conversations to be had. I have to recuse myself in that regard, but it's certainly an idea that I hope we pursue, because I don't think the door's closed. I think we just have to ask the right questions to potential financing sources.
That's a timing issue for our financial ratios. I mean, when are we paying off the schools? That like November, like about a year from now, I think.
Well, but remember, we've already appropriated
No, but we need
over
another 8
2/3
billion.
of that budget. But what I'm saying, that goes to the timeline. I mean, we have a payment waterfall, so to speak. We've already appropriated. It's that tail. If we really wanted to look at it, we need to figure out. And there's nothing a legal contract can't solve in regards to the tail. We might not borrow the money for 18 months, but they're still bound. We're bound. We know the terms. We know how we're doing it. I'm just throwing that out there because we
Right.
need to explore alternatives. We can't explore the traditional means in this market.
How does that exploration take place? That's what's important.
Calls to CEOs of banks.
Who makes it?
I cannot, but, but I'm giving, I mean, like I said, floating the idea and happy to advise. I just,
Right, so what you're talking about is bank qualified type of transaction, correct?
oh yeah, yeah.
So bank qualified can usually, I mean, you guys are more expert at this than I am, but bank qualified is always an option instead of the bond market. But from my conversations in the past, when we looked at the CIP and we looked at those high school projects, and I'd say to Barbara Horlocker, or the former finance person, I'd go like, you're not, how can we move forward on the high school projects when it's from a future bond proceeds? And she goes, that's where the reimbursement resolution comes in. We've got cash on hand. We're going to time that second bond issue when it's right for the county.
In a couple of years, yeah.
Right. So she said, you keep on, you spend the money that we appropriate for you. So in this case, I would have had $1,033,000. Well, it still wasn't appropriated. But she said, don't worry about when I time that bond proceed. And so that's really sort of because we're going to time it to the county's best advantage, and we're going to use cash if we need to before the bond is issued. And so we created, when we did our bond resolution, and this was in discussion with Barbara last November, we intentionally kept it very high level. We said $60 million for the three types of projects that were approved in the bond referendum,
Right.
so that we could at any point use cash to pay for any of the project, and we did that before the February. We had incurred, a lot of, not a lot, couple, probably $1 million or so for both the parking lot and the school project before the bonds were ever issued. And I think our first draw was, after the February, was probably $2 million. So we'd already used cash. And that was always her directive to me, is don't worry about when we decide to do the bond proceed. Move forward with your project. You've got your reimbursement resolution in place. We've got the cash to cover you.
Let's tap the brakes here for just a second.
Yeah.
Right, so that
decided
was the direction that I was being given.
But up to.
But that was also a rosy
You
environment.
gotta limit it.
Right.
The direction we got before we went after that bond issue was a very specific number on the elementary school construction. And that's how we built that 50.
Yes.
It didn't have anything, the 60, that's a 10-year number. This 50 million was built on a very specific number we were given. That's how we got to the 50. It wasn't that you can use that other 18 anytime you want. If you wanted to use the entire 60 up front, we would have built that into the number. That's not what we were told.
Mr. Waters, to answer your question about some other alternatives potentially that other school divisions have used, there is the literary loan program through the Commonwealth. Not a lot of school divisions qualify for that because I would expect we probably wouldn't qualify because of the strong fiscal management of the county. There is a grant program that the Virginia Department of Education is working on right now. Looking at the early parameters associated with that, doesn't look like we would qualify. It would be about $2 million for Goochland. It would be great if we qualified, but it doesn't look like we will. And then there's the Virginia Public School Authority, the VPSA, which most often school divisions can access. Of course, there are administrative fees associated with that, but that is another form of public financing the school divisions.
I'm thinking more of the private sector. I didn't want to suggest something that would be so out of whack that you'd say no. But I mean, it's competitive It's, you know, it's quick decisions.
Yeah.
It's the amount we need.
Yeah.
And it can be structured. That's the beautiful thing is, you want to talk about structuring, we could structure a bond all day. You could structure a bank loan for a specific project 10 times more specifically in regards to when the funds are available, when we need it, all that stuff. Yeah, I didn't want to bring that up if you said, no, that's not a financing alternative.
I think it is an option. I think ultimately that's what we'll have to decide together. Like, where do we go from here?
Yeah, I think we need to keep an open mind and explore all options. I get that. Had we gone out with another 10 on the 50, this is probably wasted time going back and what if. But that amortization is a 20-year level amortization at 2%. If you then talked about a bank loan today, you're going to double the interest rate, cut the amortization down to what, 5 or 10 years, maybe 7 years. You're not going to get a bank loan for 20 years. So you're looking at cutting the maturity in half, so the amortization principal is twice as fast, and doubling the interest rate. It's a much less efficient, effective way to finance a long-term project. Having said that, again, we're open-minded. We'll look at all things, but it's a little different. There's different implications, and let me just step back and say all these gears are connected. Right? Everything's connected. The AAA credit rating that we got from the county. When we issued the $50 million, we took those bonds to the agencies and got AAA rating on those bonds, which allowed us to get that 2.2. If we had non-rated bonds like 5 years ago, we didn't have a rating, that interest rate would not have been 2.2. It would have been dramatically higher. So you want to preserve the ability to access when you go out to get the most favorable rate. Part of that is our debt service as a percent of our budget is under our maximum cap and our target. If we now talk about issuing additional debt, additional interest, and blow those targets and those thresholds and those ratios, then they start taking a hard look at our rating, which means that we got to pay more interest. The whole thing gets into a vicious cycle as opposed to a virtuous cycle. Right now we're at a virtuous cycle, and all the gears are connected and everything's working. And that's some of the concern, is not to destabilize that and take our ratios out of line with where they've been. So it constrains us a bit, but again, I want to keep an open mind here. We'll figure this out, but there are some constraints, and all the gears are connected. I just want to make sure that the law of unintended consequences doesn't come up and bite us. So
we have to talk actual numbers to know if you're going to start getting those numbers out of whack. And I don't think Charlie's suggesting this is a long-term financing. Bank financing, whatever, is a long-term financing solution. I see it as a short-term financing solution to close the gap until we get to that point, 2 years or 3 years out when we're comfortable issuing the bonds. So we have to look at that, the debt service impact.
Right.
But then he's talking about creative structuring. The structuring would be such that it would hopefully slide us right into the timing that you're concerned about. That $8 million is not. That's not. The capital markets are not an option right now.
We need to put this front and center too. It's not the school board's fault. This is not the board of supervisors' fault. This is situations we're dealing with. Every single county in the country is dealing with the same situation if they have a major capital project. We can find a solution. We're smart enough. We have the people to do it. Last thing I want is anybody at the school board or the schools to think that there's not every option on the table, and it stinks. I wish we didn't have. It was so easy last year, and now we have to ask these tough questions, and it stinks, but we can do it.
Yeah, I mentioned groups of special. Look at the people in this room, and we haven't had a food fight yet. So this doesn't happen in very many counties. We're working together to solve a common problem. It doesn't happen very many places. So
And I think this project goes along with, we're having a discussion tonight about the courthouse village, and we have another village plan. We are, Board of Supervisors overall in this county is looking at infrastructure issues in this county and how to carefully, mindfully grow this county in a way that everyone in the county wants it to grow. We know we don't want to be anything but Goochland. And you guys have already made some really tough decisions, and you've worked very creatively with Project Rocky and that road construction that's needed. There's a lot that's happening right now, and I feel like this school is I know this school is a part of that important infrastructure decisions being made for the good of this county. The vote that our citizens made proves that. So, and the decisions, again, made towards Project Rocky, those were not done lightly either. And so, again, I think it's all part of the whole big picture of how we see Goochland, and we know that schools are a huge part of why a county thrives or a community thrives. So this project just is part of that big picture.
Let's not forget, let's don't kick the can down the road on the discussion of what's going to happen to the existing Goochland Elementary School.
Yeah, that's you're absolutely right.
Because Karen, when you were talking earlier, I thought, I see where this is going, because you were making the point, looking at all the future expenses there, that, will I put more money into that? And I'm smiling to myself thinking, okay, here you go, county. Here's your building. Don't blow on it too hard, because it might fall over.
That's just what happened last time.
But different
That's
costs.
exactly what happened last time.
Exactly. We've seen this movie before.
Different costs are needed for a school. To use an office space is different than school space.
But I knew what you said, and I just was smiling to myself, because in the earlier context, Jeremy pointed out that there's going to be competition for this because there's a desire. But I think you were talking about the wrestling room and things like that.
Right.
Because if we find a way, we will find a way. But once we find a way through this, closing this gap, it's not too long. We're going to have some discussions, because these other things on the CIP, they're just as important, or they feel just as important. So I know that C-143, that room, is that the big giant tech room in the high school?
Yep. That's the vision, yes, sir.
That's going to be awesome when we get to that. That's going to be very impactful for the schools, and that's been years. We talk about since 2000. Mike, you were talking about waiting since 2007. When we got on the board in 2011, I was so encouraged representing District 3. And all the board members went to Goochland Elementary School, and there was a discussion, where are we going to focus first? And this would have been 2012. And everybody, you remember that, and everybody was like, the then board supervisor was like, we need to fix it, we need to do something. Like, yeah, this is going to happen. So here we are, how many years later? 2012, and it's happening. But I do, let's be very intentional about talking candidly about what we're going to do with the existing elementary school and how it can impact, if it can impact some of your CIP needs that are getting removed, like I call it the wrestling room. I don't know if there's other things on the CTE front. Because let's protect ourselves from facing another situation like, oh, we made some tough decisions and this timing is still not right to go with the rest of the capital markets, but these needs are becoming greater and the solutions don't seem as apparent.
And Mr. Carpenter and I talked about the current CTE center in the preschool too, and how we need to invest some money in that from an HVAC standpoint now, before we abandon that space because it's limping along. So we have those conversations quite regularly.
Yeah. Jeremy, question. Just in putting everything on the table and looking, is there an option that would result in some functions of the elementary school staying in the elementary school, perhaps pre-K and K, turning that into an early education center, and then downsizing the needs for an elementary school?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think the way the building is currently designed, that would be difficult to separate those classrooms out. I think would take a lot of redesign, quite honestly. And then if we were to use the current preschool center, it would take a lot of renovation. We're talking significant renovation, knocking down walls and investment in some mechanical systems. So I don't know if the savings, when you look at it in totality, I don't know if there would be a benefit there. That's a worthy question.
Where are the pre-K students housed today? Where do they go today?
Yeah, currently they're on the second floor of the CTE building.
So they're already there.
They're already there, and I've shared. Many people who have visited have seen just how difficult that situation is for those youngsters and staff. It was designed for a business setting in 1975 when it was used as a CTE center there.
There's Head Start in there.
Head Start's not over there, but we have 3- and 4-year-olds with disabilities and non-disabled peers who are in there. Nearly 60 kids.
But once you abandon the school and move to the new elementary, Could those be moved down to the first floor? Is that to avoid some of the disabilities?
Down.
That's
I-
a
I-
CTE space.
That is currently being used by CTE, so you have to, yeah, it's called,
So what's the problem? No.
I would just say that that may be at least an option worth seriously looking at, if nothing else, to eliminate it as an option, because we already know we're gonna have to spend money on that school if you leave. When the school is empty, we're still gonna have to spend a lot of money on that building in order to maintain it, in order to keep it in a condition where we can then move into it in the future and spend more money and turn it into a future use. So there's cost regardless what we do, but I would say that certainly that, at least if you can downsize the future elementary school to a degree that allows you to provide the services for the elementary school and keep that maybe as early education, that may bridge a gap.
yeah, and we'll certainly ponder that. I think the current design right now is not modular, allowing us to eliminate 5 classrooms just like that. So it would take a pretty significant rework of the floor plan, but certainly doable on that.
Dr. Rayleigh also put forth, mentioned the boundary adjustments.
Yes.
So now you're bringing more pre-K, K kids potentially into this area. And then staff. Like, okay, I've got Miss McKay at the new GES, where's my administration, my staff, my central services, and so forth. Now you have redundancy, and those are ongoing overhead costs that you have to consider as well.
Wear and tear on faculty, staff, going back and forth.
Continuity, right?
Continuity, oh my gosh.
There's just a number
I
of
didn't say it was a
of.
perfect.
No,
Okay.
just kind of thinking about some of
Gotta
the
save
non.
money somewhere, yeah.
One other observation, caveat, I guess, that I think could be said is part of the figures we're looking at are based in part on CIP. Future CIP, as Ms. Laskela pointed out, is not funded. And I think I'd be remiss if I didn't say that we have no guarantees that it will be funded.
Exactly.
As we look at the economy going right now, we tend to make an assumption the next 5 years we're going to have this much money every year available for CIPs. But at this point, I don't know that my staff is comfortable to say that money is absolutely going to be here based on unknown expenses and unknown revenues. So I think that's also important that we not count chickens before they're hatched, if I may say that.
I think history will show that if you underestimate the size of a building and cut back just for the cost, you end up with trailers in the back of schools. So you have to be proactive and think about this. We added 50 kindergarten students last year that we were not expecting. So that is a variable that I think no one knows the answer to, but cutting back on the size of the school is not going to help.
There's been some discussion around the timing on when and if, under what conditions we can access the additional referendum proceeds that have not been issued yet. And a couple of things on that. One is we did the 50 now and 50 later to divide the projects up. We have public safety projects, building new firehouses. We have a courthouse that needs to be replaced. All of these things were in that referendum. And we as a county decided it would be imprudent to launch all those projects at once. So part of the rationale behind doing this portion now and a portion later is this year project management as well. So we didn't anticipate going back out until we're ready for another big project. You know, GES gets done and then you start the courthouse project or a couple of firehouses. So part of it is timing of the markets, part of it is just project management. The markets, if you want to know what the timing of where interest rates are headed, the best way to figure that out is to ask the people that set the rate. And the Federal Reserve has what they call an open market committee in FOMC. And there's voting members on the FOMC, and they're the ones that actually decide whether or not rates go up or down. If you look at what the FOMC does, they publish what they call a dot plot. Every voting member on the FOMC puts a dot plot for the next several years and says, this is where I think rates are going, and this is how I plan to vote if I had to vote today. Subject to change every day, every week, every month. You pull up that Fed dot plot and you'll see that in 2 weeks, mid-December, the markets are pricing in a 50 basis point or 0.5% hike. Not as the last time. There's some discussion around a 3/4 point hike. The last 4 times they've done it, it's been 3/4, so there's some pattern there. But if you want to know where the rates are headed, just look at what the people that set the rate are telling you where they're headed. And they're not saying they're coming down anytime soon. They're continuing to go up now. They'll pause and leave them there for a while, could be a year or more. And then when they start to say that they're gonna start taking rates back down, now you're coming back down the backside of the interest rate cycle. That's probably a couple of years out. That's probably when GS was supposed to be finished. That's probably when we go back out and fund the courthouse and some firehouses. That's the way we had set this whole thing up as far as timing goes. We can revisit all of that, but that's kind of the way the big picture 30,000 foot, strategy was set up.
Yep.
But if you want to know where rates are headed and what the timing is and when the capital markets might open back up again and all that, just look at the voting members of the FOMC and what they're telling you, because that's the closest you can get is the people that actually set the rate. The last thing, just real quick, we've got about 25 minutes or so. I would put to the school board and Dr. Rayleigh, what do you need coming out of this meeting? We've got a few minutes left to discuss. Are there dates? Are there milestones? Are there decisions? The timing, could you kind of share with us so that we use it the time we have remaining?
And let me flip it around. So I think what we need out of this, you're giving us a lot of information, but I want to make sure we need to be comfortable that we've got the very best number that what is the gap that you need to cover, and we need to be super comfortable that is the best you can do. And I've been looking at prior agendas, our board meeting agendas, looking for somewhere in the past. I think you had a number in there where you had VDOE had some funds out there for building. And we're not the only school division facing this, and I think the state folks I understand we'll see what General Assembly does in the next budget, but I think there's going to be some construction money out there. Yeah. But the number that you all had before, so I remember asking, you said that's not. It was a number for construction. Yeah. It was in the millions, but in the low millions. But I don't honestly remember, and I was trying to find it. I can't find it in the agenda meeting. So let's look. We really need to be comfortable. As a board member, I really need to be comfortable that y'all have pared it down and sliced it and diced it every which way you can. And then what is, at the end of the day, what's the number that we need to work together to cover?
Yeah. And then what are our options, then what are our options based on whatever that number is? What does it do to our debt service? What does it do to our
and
costs?
That's stuff I think we're going to have to roll up our sleeves.
That's what I'm saying, but
do.
we need that number first.
Yeah.
But we can't make any decision until we understand.
This is the delta. This is the delta here in yellow. This is what you've already appropriated. So if you add all this up, that's the differential between what you've already appropriated and the total project costs. We feel great about the total project costs as we are here today. Since we received the bids through the holidays, we have pared $611,000 off. Feel really good about that. There is likely to be additional savings, and I just don't have that number for you, but it's not going to go higher than this delta right now. That will be a contractual cost, that if the board chooses to sign a contract, that will be the contract cost. It may get lower. Any sort of project savings that we get through change orders, great. We'll put that towards future projects, but none guaranteed. This figure comes from the $1,033,000 that was initially sold, that has not yet been appropriated, plus $5 million of bond premium. The supervisors could appropriate that with school board ask, and that could be done. This is the bond interest earnings. Supervisors could appropriate that to us once the school board asks for that appropriation. So to me, that is probably in the magnitude of it all, maybe an easier decision, potentially. None of these decisions are easy, but it could be an easier decision. The big question is what you do here, is the $8.4 million. How do you close the gap there? Is it cash funded? Is it done through a future bond sale and then the county reimburses themselves? You go out to the public market somehow and close that gap. But to me, that is probably the most difficult decision, is how you get to that 8.4 figure.
8.5,
And that's $8 that you were referencing.
Saying ask for 10.
Don't ask for 24.2.
VDOE.
We're not going to meet.
You're not going to get any of the grant or construction money.
I'm sorry you asked that question. Yeah, we've scrubbed the qualifications of all that, and we just don't get enough points to qualify.
What are we doing wrong?
management
Well,
money.
It's those quick rules.
You guys are too good.
Jeremy, and I know I've asked this question to some degree before, but one of the costs that we're really not looking at, and this is probably not the group that could look at it, but the site costs. It's $10 million of the project, and to what degree that could be mitigated through I mean, to what degree we know that is a hard, firm cost. To what degree could we adjust that?
Yeah, we feel confident we can save an additional $120,000 in site costs today. There are also allowances that are in the site of if you move X amount of dirt, it's going to cost you Y. Jim, could you talk a little bit more about the site allowances that may reveal some potential savings?
Those are to cover some unforeseen conditions, so we think based on some of the surveys out there, we may have some soil issues. So we have some contingency built into the contract documents where we can draw from those contingency funds if we find soft soils and have to improve soils for parking lots and for the building pad and foundations.
Also, Mr. Carpenter and Mr. Ridley probably speak better. There was a lot of work done by Dr. Ridley and his team with the site work, and they actually shaved how much off? There was like a significant amount already shaved, like $1 million.
When we transitioned from the initial design to the second design, we shaved a lot off of that just because we narrowed the footprint and oriented the building a little bit differently, and there were definitely six-figure savings there, maybe upwards of $1 million when we made that transition with some site costs.
So there was a lot of work that went into
It's a huge number though, 20%.
I see a huge CTE opportunity.
I know.
A huge CTE learning. He can learn an awful lot from you.
Sure, the contract.
Bruce, you've been pretty quiet back there.
I'm on it.
Are you on it? Heavy equipment operators, you're on?
So I'd like to raise one more point too. And this kind of goes back to what you were saying as far as timing out what's been issued and then figuring out the rest. But so 41.8 has been issued. And you probably know a lot more about this than I do, but I don't think you can sit on it for too long. So, I mean, there's the arbitrage factor, but isn't there a time limit?
8 years.
We propose it 10 years.
8 years.
That's kind of what I was thinking, but I texted Barbara, how long do we have to spend this? And she said ideally 3 years.
Two different things. To issue the additional bonds
For the referendum.
for the referendum is about 8 years. To spend
What's already been
the
issued.
bonds you've already sold is a shorter period of time
Okay.
to have arbitrage issues.
Okay.
And while I'm not an expert, that's where you're looking about 3 years.
So that being said, I mean, it doesn't have to be today, but I do feel like it does need to be decided upon fairly quickly if we're going to move forward with this or not. So we aren't sitting on this for years and years.
I think, Mr. Lumpkins, you also asked about timing. So the school board's going to meet after this to decide what direction they would like to do as far as a request to the supervisors formally. Of course, you meet next week. The school board is scheduled to meet December the 13th for their regular board meeting, all of that being done in December. In a perfect world, decisions made prior to December 13th with a contract signed prior to the holiday, and then you begin the groundbreaking process after that. That would be a perfect world. We know the bids are due good for 60 days, so we can't go too far into January.
It'll be like January 17th, right?
The latest.
Yeah.
There is a Finance and Audit Committee meeting scheduled just prior to our December board meeting, so there'll be a chance for the Finance Committee to meet. That 8.4 shortfall, is that the last $8 million you're going to spend, or the first $8 million you're going to spend?
That works best.
I use the term tail.
Likely the end.
Just asking.
Yeah.
Because so what do they hear, 18, 20 months, 2 years, different budget cycles? I mean, just throwing that out there.
I would think, by the time you do punch outs and everything, your last payment is December 2024, January 2025, maybe, before everything's completely closed out. I don't know, Jim, is that?
No, I think you nailed it. Yep.
Can you pass the next election? Okay, well, that just, I just want to throw it out there that maybe someone's asking is time on our side or is it against us. Dollars are fungible, I get, but, and to Ms. Lasclet's point, I think it's absolutely valid. You don't pull the trigger on this and say, let's, go until you know where all the funding's coming from.
Exactly.
You don't cross your fingers and hope. You can't get your hope it will mixed up with your think it will. You have to think it will, not hope it will, so. So timing wise, $8.5 million, close it in the next 30 days with 2 board meetings in between.
That's good song.
Land the plane.
That's my goal.
Well, folks, anything else before we wrap up?
So when will we get some idea? You'll give us some numbers sometime
Yeah,
after
school-
y'all meet today?
Yeah, we have a sample transmittal letter that may or may not be modified based on what the board decides, and get that to Mr. Carpenter by the end of the business day, and then get that as part of your official packet for consideration moving forward.
Okay, and so then what we have to do then is look at our, what all the costs, so probably on our January agenda.
We can do it sooner if you want, but definitely January. It's not on the next agenda, so we
It's
have to
definitely not
modify
on our
the
December
agenda, so.
6th, right?
Mr. Moon, are you adjourning your board, and then, or are you keeping it open for the next
We're
week?
going to move.
We'll just recess to bring 250.
We'll recess.
Okay.
Come out to the village plan and 6 o'clock.
So we're going to be slackers. We're going to adjourn our board to the December 6th, 12:30 Supervisors Audit Finance Committee meeting, and our 2 p.m. regular business meeting, and then our December 13th Transportation Work Session. Our board is adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all so much.